So, hi Richa, welcome to our interview with Purple Pencil Project. I'm Prakriti for everyone watching and who may not know. And Richa's latest book, Richa is actually a journalist, screenwriter, and novel writer. So, we're going to have a lot of discussion on storytelling across formats today. And Richa's sixth book, is that correct? Or seventh book? Sixth or seventh?
So this is
Oh,
this is no, this is my because I have got four in Hindi also,
Hindi also.
and yes, four in Hindi and around five in English.
So yes,
Yeah, which makes it
sixth
around eight or
English,
nine.
yeah. So sixth English book,
Yes,
let's
yes,
to be specific,
yes.
has
Right,
just
right.
released. So congratulations on the release of Contamination. Um, I want to begin with
Thank
the
you, Prakriti. Thank
genre.
you for having me here.
Thank you. Yeah. So I want to begin with the genre of Contamination, which is so fascinating. It's military fiction. It's also horror, and but it's laced with supernatural, right? So I want to begin at the very beginning. How do you come up with something that's so intensely different? And what were the kind of real life, maybe experiences or stories of militia, military conflict that you perhaps read that inspired this work and story?
Mhm. Absolutely. So this is my book, Contamination, and I will of course talk about the cover in a bit. Contamination, as you rightly said, is the it's a merger of two genres, war and horror. And I'd love to kind of explain it very simply. जैसे फिल्मों में होता है ना, tagline होती है, be very afraid or dog the fire. So if this kind of a book had a tagline, it would probably be grenades, guns, and ghosts. But wars are not simple. There's nothing called a simple war. Even a low intensity war is very complicated. There are just so many separate tragedies and different perspectives. As a journalist, generally one's exposed to conflict stories more than others. This was not my beat. My beat is entertainment, but you can not be exposed to conflict stories if you are a journalist in a 24 hours news channel. And specifically, related to this book, I'm talking about the conflict between the state versus indigenous tribes or forest dwellers or Adivasis or Naxals as they are called. And we know that Adivasis and forest dwellers, they thrive along certain belts in India like Northeast, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, to name a few places. And these people live buried under compromises. They are exploited, they are stigmatized, they are marginalized like it's no one's business, and they're viewed with suspicion. Real conflict arises when they are denied the one thing they own, which is their traditional land rights over their own land parcels. And in this story, these tribals, these forest dwellers, they take up arms, they resist, and they fight back. And that earns them the wrath of the state. The state is, of course, very powerful. Even in real life, we know state has endless supplies. They can outflank any outburst of rebellion. We all know how effectively states can employ tools, whether it is nakabandi, economic blockade, or police bandobas or whatever. And stakes become very, very high. So on one hand, we have the bullets flying, you have grenades exploding, body count rises, characters spending days literally, dodging artillery, getting slammed, surviving on low ammunition, freeze. There is very real possibility of them getting blown to bits and freezing to death. And in the middle of this come the ghosts. So I've merged the paranoia of a constant war situation with horror imagery. So from hunting my characters, they become the hunted. And it takes the characters to the very edge of being human. And I wanted to see how much I would push in the story without going too excessive, because it has to be believable also. But the larger unifying theme is that war is the greater horror and not ghosts. Having said that, I just want to add one more thing here. Was I skeptical about introducing the fantastic narrative into a rational narrative? Because before, prior to this, I've never talked about the supernatural. I've never written about the fantastic. I've only talked about very rational stories, whether it's a crime thriller, whether it was Item Girl or Hungry Gods or Garbage Beat. All these are very rooted in the today, the contemporary, the rational. So was I skeptical about introducing the very fantastic thing in the rational narrative? Yes. Was I unsure about testing my reader's commitment to the rational? Yes, totally yes. But at the end of the day, one has to go with a gut feeling. And enchantment, there's also this word called enchantment, which or re-enchantment, which I'm really quite intrigued with. And I think this book delivers that kind of enchantment, which is a little more than just escapism or entertainment, which is also not a bad thing. Stories giving just escapism or entertainment is not a bad thing at all. But I think this book gives, apart from that, also enchantment. Through there is this promise of a world of wonder and mystery, and it offers a hope that we haven't seen it all yet. And at the end of the day, we are, India may, I mean, supernature is our godmother, whether you believe it ghosts or not. It is in our blood. Literally, that is actually the tagline also. For my book, Manoj Bajpayee had been very gracious. He had given um, a lovely kind of a quote for the book. But Farooq Dondi, who's a British playwright and he's a screenwriter, he had also given this quote. He wrote, "Supernature is India's godmother, and contamination gives her an original and compelling and action-filled avatar." And I do believe in the fact that as Indians, we just believe, we want to believe in tales of magic and myth. It's part of our, part of our growing up, really, Prakriti.
It really is, and and I think writing from that place also lends it an authenticity, right? Writing from a place where it's so much a part of you, and so when you build it up from there, there is a sincerity. It doesn't feel like it's borrowed. It
Yes.
doesn't feel like you're making stuff up. It really feels like something from the land, right? But more is great. However, you build a really rich world in contamination, right? The Jatsoma forest, for instance, the little nuances
Yes.
of the people, the characters. Did you have to do like specific research for it about the world, about the
Absolutely.
geography, about the cultural nuances? And how did you go about that? For me, the research process for writers is always a very fascinating part. And I'd like you to talk about that.
Absolutely, Prakriti, this is a military horror and it's a very underutilized genre in India. And I mean, soldiers and combats are taking center stage along with the supernatural. Research is a key in this kind of a story. In fact, research is the most important thing. And journalism, I think, gives you that kind of resilience to see it through. I call it the 3 R's: research, the right questions, and being resourceful. So I think, for instance, is it for instance, when I'm writing a story or a scene in a book like this, there are a lot of combat scenes. So I have to think when I'm writing a scene, is it firstly a low intensity conflict or a high intensity conflict? What kind of weapon or ammunition should be used? What is the terrain? Is it a trench or a reverse slope? Is it a dirt track or a steep hill road? Also, since this is a small militia unit, मतलब ये बहुत इनके पास बहुत पैसा नहीं है. They are not like the army. This is a militia unit, small unit. So इनके weapons will be cheap, functional, second hand. There will be faulty gear. कई बार it will work, कई बार it won't work. This will be built, not this will be either it is obtained second hand from the smuggling, from the underground route, or it would have been made in little factories, backyard factories, right? So basically readily available cargo. Maybe they're manufacturing it, in places, in little cottages, right? The characters are not exactly a friendly territory, and I cannot have my characters on the wrong side of the barrel easily. So the bigger challenge for me was to make it all believable without it becoming too expensive. There's a lot of unexplored terrain to be covered in militia horror, and this is the first of its kind in India. I don't think anyone that has really talked about this kind of has written a story in this genre. And my hero is a female combat. She's pitted against a psychopathic colonel. His name is, of course, Rosie Magbull. We'll get to it, or maybe we'll just get to it now. I mean, they say. So I'd like to talk about Amba. Of course, we will talk about her. She's a female hero. She's the main protagonist. She's my the hero. I would love to talk about eventually, but they say whenever you have a story of a good versus evil, it's only as good as the villain. And my villain is like as evil as they come. In fact, I don't know whether you've read my previous book. In that book, that was Hungry Gods. In this book, my villain's name was Dr. Varanganathan, and he was extremely evil. And I thought, my God, I've broken the mold. I cannot write about a character who can be more evil than this guy, Ranga. But no, there we have Rosie. In his verse, have you seen this film called No Country for Old Men? Usme the character Anton Chigurh ka character, and when he says, "What's the most you have ever lost on a coin toss?" The most you ever lost. I mean, that's the kind of goosebumpy thing was my template to create Colonel Rosie Magbull. What do you say about a man who, by his own admission, says that he has no soul? It is like Rosie Magbull ka literally character ye hai ki to what level he is just willing to sink to. And starting from his very name, people have asked me about the name Rosie and Magbull, and I think it's a very wicked name because it contrasts to very different kind of thought processes in it. So I think there's plenty of wicked and contamination. When especially when I was writing about Rosie Magbull, for instance, he has a very twisted moral code to get inside his head itself was very challenging. It was like getting into a very dark room. There was only one way out, and there are like 1,000 keys. His meanness is literally like an organ. He's a sadist. And you know what sadists are like? They enjoy watching other people suffer. And he believes the rules don't apply to him. He's dangerous. He's a egotistical creep. He's grotesque, and he causes a lot of damage. And so when he's a very essential part of the book Contamination. Of course, we'll eventually get to Amba also. Amba, who's my main, who's the main protagonist, and her wars and the kind of wars she has to wage, which are not just interior, they're exterior wars. She has to face, like any girl, like even women today, girls today, you have to face wars on multiple levels. Amba faces wars on different kinds of levels, and how she deals with that, her whole journey, following the whole, we have Joseph Campbell, who has this whole journey. If you have heard of the 3 triple act structure, the monomyth, where, you have a complete structure of the of journey of a hero. Similarly, Amba also has a journey, which we will, I guess, talk about in the course of this discussion. But for now, I think, yes, Rosie Madbull is someone writing. In fact, I wonder if I can write about someone more evil than him. That would be a challenge.
This question I was saving for later, but I have to bring it, forward. Is that you spoke about writing evil in Hungry Gods, and I know Hungry Gods has much more than evil. It has various facets of various levels of violence, evil, and a lot of those emotions. Contamination also has a lot of that. As a writer, right, as a human being, forget the writer part of it, but as a human being, to write this kind of stuff, right, what is the kind of mental frame you have to get into, and does it leave kind of an emotional residue? Is it, writing about someone, writing so much, let's just, for the lack of a better word right now, use negative, right? Like writing so much of these extreme emotions, not even negative, but this extremity of emotions. You yourself said, if you want to see how much you could push without tipping off. So how does that work as a on your emotional fabric, on maybe your moods, on your approach to just your outlook towards life? For a particular day, it's just like everything is crap. So how does that work, as when it comes to writing such extreme emotions of hatred, of violence, of evil?
Oh, I think when I was writing my first book, it kind of could have affected me a bit more, even though actually the first book was Garbage Beat, which was a satire. So that was that was a lot of fun. That was actually a lot of fun because it was based on real life situations, and it was almost non-fiction. It was on a newsroom and things like that. So that was actually a lot of fun. And I wrote it pretty fast. I wrote it in like 4-5 months. And it was great fun. After that, the fun stopped. Then I wrote something, Item Girl. Or was it some other, let me just, like, for instance, I wrote Item Girl. So this was also about, this got me in a slightly darker space than I was kind of used to. But at the end of the day, we have to own your temperament. You cannot be like someone else. You have to be like yourself. And by the time I have reached Contamination, in fact, I've written my next book. Before Contamination, I wrote A History of Violence, which is my next book. It's just that this one was published before. My next book is A History of Violence. That also talks about guns and guerrillas, but there are no ghosts in that book. So by the time I've reached this particular book, 7th or 8th or 9th book, I'm not really very much affected by the violence, etc. Because this is, I mean, it's as a journalist, I've been in any case exposed to a lot of conflict situations. I've been a journalist for the last like 15 to 16 years. And so it's not really something very new to me. Of course, supernatural is something, is a different thing. I mean, I come to it. I mean, do I believe in it? Where does that start? Where was the first tryst? I'm an atheist. I personally do not believe in the ghosts or ghouls. But we will talk about that, essentially, this particular book is what can I say? It didn't affect me like that in an emotional level. Because if you start getting too much affected at an emotional level, then you cannot really write, you cannot see the larger picture. You have to play God. God is not affected by emotional levels of his characters. You have to play God. You cannot be like, affected by, acha, ye mera character hai. I like this one more. Okay. No, you have to be quite cold-blooded. No, you're not affected at all. In fact, you should be able to just, when you stop writing a particular chapter, there's of course there are little things, different writers have different processes. Like some writers like to stop at a point where, which is very exciting, so that, because writing is very, very traumatic, I mean, it is a solitary process, kaam karke aao, and then you have to write this for hours and everything. And it's very solitary. It can be very traumatic also. So you need to stop at a place where it's very exciting for you and for the plot, so that you can take it up. But at this stage, no, you are not affected by their dilemmas and traumas. Of course, you're concerned. You are definitely invested in it. You have invested in the character. You believe in your characters. You see, for this particular story, contamination. Let me, though, I would like to say that. For me, the big thing for this book was that I have tried to talk about the human frustrations of a female combat who's leading a group of male combats, right? So I had to, and traditionally क्या होता है हमारे जो स्टोरी फॉर्मेट्स है उसमें मेल हीरो टेम्पलेट होता है वुमन इज ईदर द टेम्परेस or she to tempt the male, or she's a catalyst to help him achieve his goal. But in contamination, that stereotype is broken, right? I mean, because even though Amba's heroic journey, she follows the classic Joseph Campbell template, which I just mentioned. I mean, she has trauma initially, there's a call to adventure, and then the ordeals and rites of passage, battle, resolution, and final resurrection. और पूरा arc है इसका. But there are very real battles. Amba goes through the trials of operating in a male-dominated zone. Now, these are very rugged and tough men who have to obey her. They don't want to obey her in the first place. I mean, she has to make a place like any woman. And they make it very difficult for her. She gives it back as good as she gets. There are always those men who think less of her. There is, just because it's a conflict zone doesn't mean you have it easy. There is no reason for them to make allowances to help her succeed. I mean, if Amba had refused to take up the challenge, then her experience would have been of a victim, not a hero, right? So the plot is such that it makes her choose. It provokes her to make choices, and her choices reveal her integrity. So I think Amba's heroism is what I was invested in, right? Amba's heroism, her choices, have nothing to do with gender. In fact, and there is, if I may say so, there is no separate uniform for a female hero or a male hero. Heroism is gender agnostic, right? I mean, we can't deny that there are active challenges to female power presence in every level, even for us also. But I have totally avoided explaining her choices from the gender point of view, because I think that kind of flattens the storytelling. This story is also a look at the human condition. There are tests and struggles, and she forms allies, she has enemies, she faces ordeals, she has battles, there are rewards. And Amba's journey transforms her both in an exterior fashion and in an interior fashion also. And this is the story of her becoming of a hero. And this is what I was invested on. And her emotions have to be authentic, right, to be believable. And Amba is a champion at becoming. It's not like she's become a hero. She's becoming. She's changing. And I think watching the whole process of a person becoming a hero is much more interesting than, you see, and that is a more heroic thing. However, I also think that, other emotions, of course, are also invested in. The whole transformative power of forgiveness is also a very strong strain in this book. So, so as I said, I mean, it was not like the emotions of the book were kind of, affecting my emotional fabric. No, I had to have a very strong character like Amba, who has to make her choices. So I was completely invested in her. And so in that sense, I think there is a huge difference when I look at Amba as my heroine, and when I look at the heroines I had in Item Girl, or when I was, even in my previous book, Hungry Gods. So, and I mean, there has been, I think, a change in the way I am representing my female hero. So, which I am quite happy with. But of course, there's a long way to go.
I was about to ask you that you have had consistently written about females, but you've also written them over a period of time, and all of us grow.
Right.
All of us grow with age, with the times, with the social context, with the the context of our times as well. So how much? So you answered it almost, but I'm glad you touched upon it. The fact that as writers as well, right? whom we write about, even if they are very much our own gender, maybe they're inspired by own experiences, yet that will change with time. And I'm, to be at a place where, like, yes, I feel like this is a place of power I'm writing from, not a place of victimhood. Like, that was really so
Okay.
nice to see come alive, right? Even for you to see the character arc at the end of the whole thing, must have been so nice for you to say, okay, I like this hero. And just to kind of build up on that, right? Amba sounds also much like the hero I want to see on screen, right? I want to see the story.
Right.
I want to see the story of power of a woman and her struggles in her life come alive. And I know a couple of your books have gone in production. To kind of connect that with the fact that you're also a screenwriter, right? How does it help,
Right.
or kind of what are the challenges of juggling two mediums?
Right.
And you know, uh, how do you see contamination going on screen anytime soon? Because I feel like this is
Right.
a story that would be so
Abs-
difficult to pull off, because horror itself is done not very, very successfully in India. But also then lacing horror with war, which is so tricky to do visually. You need the right director, you kind of need the right person to direct, to bring that vision to life. So I guess I want to, like, kind of break my question down, on this little monologue down, into two things. One, how involved are you, coming from a screenwriter perspective, how involved are you on who takes up your project for screen? And
Right.
second, do you sometimes, or do you think that having that visual first imagination, also being a TV journalist, being in the multimedia space 24/7, helps you write more visual, more visceral stuff?
Oh, so these are so many questions.
Two, are you involved,
So,
and does it help? Two basic
uh,
stuff.
okay, let me just put it this way. Being a journalist is a completely different thing, and being a storyteller. See, at the end of the day, we are all invested in our stories. Is the big thing. Is the connecting line. We love stories. Whether you're a journalist or a storyteller or just a writer or a screenwriter, you love stories, right? But coming to the main question, the crux of your question is books like this translating on OTT, does it work, not work, supernatural, etc. What I think is that the content, I think you're basically asking about content, and which is there maybe on screen, on OTT and things like that. And how does this translate? I think content panders either to commerce or culture, right? Commerce, if you look at it, is related to आपका desires, and culture is to needs. So जो content आप screen पे देखते हैं, whatever you see on screen, even in books, the content which you see, and I'm talking about fiction, I'm not talking about non-fiction. You see, I'm talking about fiction. So the content which you see generally swings between rational, escapist, entertainment, or enchantment. So these are the different ways in which you can have your stories and stuff, right? So I think enchantment, personally, just talking about this book, I think, or this kind of genre. See, recently you had films like Kantara, you had Tumbad, you had before that Brahmastra, you have book films like this which are now finding a lot of acceptance. I think because people want to be re-enchanted, and I think enchantment, which I said in your my first answer also, I said enchantment delivers something more than escapism and entertainment, right? It's a promise of a world of mystery, of something we haven't seen. Otherwise, imagine living a life where we've seen it all and there's nothing more to see. That's a very, very boring life. Like that's something, it's like a very rational life, but there's no enchantment in it. We still don't have a lot of the rings. We don't have an Alice in Wonderland in India. We do have a Koi Mil Gaya, we have Krish, we have Bhul Bhulaiya, we have, of course, great stuff now. We have Kantara, we have Tumbad stuff. What I'm saying is top earners, even till a few, and you're right, top earners, jo aapke, if you look at the screen, even till a few months or months ago, were not really expected to be from the wizardry world or apocalyptic destruction by supernatural forces. No one was investing in that kind of money and time in such a project. In fact, if you see the last 4 decades, only a handful of top hits have been there which belong to fantasy or horror, or I mean, I'm not talking about Ramsey brothers. They are like completely different zone. You see, so I don't know, but has that changed? We just come to it. But the point is, I think it's to do with there has been, however, with the coming in of OTT and everything, there's been this globalization and global content. People are now exposed to global content. So there has been a cultural change in audience taste. People are now opening up to this, and this is very, very recent. You see, we are just watching it unfold. It's just the initial point. And watching films on mythology, supernatural, and people are even watching films on, of course, nationalism themes are always there, but I'm talking distinctly of supernatural and mythology and stuff. So there is a distinct shift in taste recently. I mean, and big budgets are being, or fairly big budgets are being, Brahmastra was an exception, are being invested in such films. However, I still think that Indian storytelling is still very much partial to family dramas, very much partial. And they're still, people are still, and I don't know, maybe the audience has moved ahead, but filmmakers are still very partial to tales of love and wealth and lost and found and choreographed dance pieces and Bollywood. And the funny thing is, Bollywood is the largest film industry in the world, and it is still being so disinterested in supernatural fantasy adventure films. Why? And why it's puzzling is because Indian storytelling, हमारा जो original storytelling है, it's replete, it's so rich with folk tales and magic tales and myth. I mean, we've grown up with stories from nanis and dadis on whether it was Mahabharata, whether it was Upanishads, whether it was, I mean, just look at the stuff we have, the kind of stories we've heard. Why don't we never saw it in films, right? We've seen just something completely different. And so what I'm saying is, this is part of our cultural history. And the absence of this kind of genre in Bollywood is very baffling. There is an overabundance in Hollywood, which is very remarkable because they don't have a history like us. They've always been very rational people, right? So I was reading up on this because so many people were asking me. I actually read up on this. Apparently, there is this 19th century sociologist. His name was Max Weber. He came up with this theory called disenchanted. He said in the Western society, people who consume Hollywood, they live very predictable and rational lives, right? So, which leads to a widespread loss of sense of wonder, sense of magic. So, they seek it in films. They want it in films. They turn to sci-fi films, fantasy films, adventure films. That is why we have Lord of the Rings, we have Alice in Wonderland, we have such wonderful films in Hollywood. But Indian audiences are not very keen on it, were not very keen on it because the makers kind of relegated the supernatural to a lower position. I think it was also to do with a particular moment of cultural history. But there has been departure now in coming of global content and things, and it's become very exciting. And even though, the change is not as fast as we would like it to be, but yes, there is definitely, we are at the crux of that change.
I love that. And that is so true. I also feel like sometimes, maybe because our urban life is beginning to mirror American urban life, where enchantment is increasingly less in our own personal lives, that these stories are becoming more appealing to us.
Exactly. Right.
So I think that there's that overlap happening in terms of our personal lives as well. So, that's absolutely right. I think our kind of urban life is has reached a stage where enchantment is needed again, or where too much. And of course, the last 3-4 years have been such a kind of reality, challenge of realities for us. So, wanting to be a part of these alternate worlds is, at least I find myself super gravitated to these stories more and more. Even, I've always been a fantasy reader, but now it's almost like without that, I don't know what to do or where to go for my kind of, as a reader, cathartic reading. So I hope there's more stuff like that producers are willing to kind of bet upon. I want to,
however, this is not complete fantasy. This is right.
Yeah,
this is a merging of the two genres. So this is not exactly total fantasy. Yes.
True. Your genres are very fascinating to me. Because I think as a writer, sometimes what we tend to do is gravitate towards the same themes again and again. So kudos to you that you've consistently picked up like some of the most diverse things to do as a writer. One of the challenges, and I've been in the writing space, it made different kinds of writing, but I'm in the space, and one of the challenges I find is kind of getting the right vocabulary to express emotions, right? Like horror, just the emotions of chills, your bone chilling stuff, for instance. So the words you use is such a it's so distinct, right? And it's restricted to genres. A fun, if you're writing a fun peppy story, you want to have those descriptive words. So how do you work with language as you write different genres? Do you have to do like a reading of more horror to kind of get into that linguistic space? How do you tackle that?
Uh, so I approach everything from the story's point of view. What I'm saying is that, let me just put it this way, that there is this whole sense that seeing comes before words, right? What we see things before before we can even describe it, right? And what we see is what we notice. So the way see things is also affected by, I think, what we know, what we believe, maybe what we believe or not believe, maybe what we have heard sometimes, maybe our own history. So seeing things and looking at things before we even put it in words is not a question of just mechanically reacting to a stimuli, right? We only see what we look at, and I think to look at something is an act of choice, and it has a lot to do with where the person comes from and awareness of one's history, and things like aesthetics, taste, grammar, genre, all that comes later. uh, Actually, at the end of the day, I don't think the reader really cares that much about the genre you're writing in. I don't know about others, but I am also not very comfortable just being boxed in a genre, right? I mean, I think what you need to have is a strong narrative, a coherent beginning, middle, end. I mean, you have to have a proper structure. What I think the reader really wants is a prick of recognition. He needs to recognize something which is authentic and honest. And first and foremost for me is have a story, have a story, have a story, have a story. If you don't have a story, then there's just no point of writing. I mean, more. So what I'm saying is that you are born with a temperament and you cannot change it. All you have to do is to learn to recognize that temperament, own that temperament, and spin a story, being honest to that temperament. And plot, of course, is important. I think for me, when I'm writing, it takes a lot of redrafts to develop the plot, to work out the characters. And I live with the characters a lot. So of course, there is this continuity to take care of. There has to be vigor and language, irony, wo sab hai. I mean, setting has to be there. I begin to get in touch with the people who I'm writing about, and there are the clues, because I think in these kind of book, clues are also very important. Attention to every little detail of everyday life. And it's not just about creating puzzle or leaving clues, it's about the atmospherics. So I think writing is in fact a lot to do with those kind of suggestions or clues or truth of relationships also between people and nature, processes and systems. So selecting a set of events, arranging them in a certain order, making use of experiences to reveal a reality, I think is a part of a process, my process. But before you write anything of consequence, you must be able to observe. And journalists, I think, I've been lucky that way, are trained to observe, to notice, to ask questions and seek answers. And I believe it's a natural progression from being a journalist to a writer. So it comes easily. Whether you're a journalist, writer, screenwriter, novelist, as I said, it all boils down to the fact that you are passionate about telling a story. And we love stories, perhaps because we want affirmation that our lives have some meaning, that, we are somehow of greater consequence than a byline. And also stories help through our characters we can cross time barriers. It allows us to experience through characters. There is nothing to writing at the end of the day. Actually, it's just coming and sitting on a table, on a chair, and writing. That is all it is. There's nothing to writing at the end of the day. The cardinal rule is, of course, that you should never approach your screen, desktop, paper with a light feeling, with a just never come lightly to it. So everyone, I mean, I think everything one says from the first line to the last word also should perhaps confirm some truth that deepens an understanding of who we are as human beings. What matters to us, what pushes our buttons. So I really think that one needs to have constructed honest conflicts, authentic emotions, and have your characters invested in authentic emotions. ये नहीं कि जो trend चल रहा है उसके हिसाब से आपने एक character डाल दिया and then you are imposing emotions on him. No. So you have to also quit while you're ahead. You have to stop telling a story when it stops becoming interesting. Right. And I trust my characters. You have to believe in your characters. I trust in what they are doing. And plot is important, but I think the way you tell it, telling is also very important. The way you tell the plot. And at the end of the day, it's what pushes your buttons, which is the most important thing for me.
Yeah, I love that, this the trend of emotions. Don't ride on that. I love, this is so much of my headline moment for me, where I'm like, because so many of the times it happens that we lead with what we think is the emotion of the year, right? Like,
Huh.
um, or even sometimes a certain social issue of the year, or so, like we
Or
lead
something
with
which is
that.
trending, something which is
Yeah,
trending, something which
something
is
was
popular.
trending because we're
Right.
so, like, maybe because we're seeing it so much around us, it kind of, we internalize it and then we want to write about it. But going past that
And
barrier.
there is, by the way, but Prakriti, there's nothing wrong in that so long as, I mean, my point is for a long format writing, it becomes
Correct.
difficult to sustain that energy
Correct.
unless you're not honestly and invested in it. And how, if you're not, how will you get that kind of energy to
Yeah.
even be invested in something which you
Yeah.
don't really feel very deeply about?
Correct.
Otherwise,
Correct.
there's no harm in writing about trend. I mean, we do it
Yeah.
all the time. We write stories, we write articles. That's a different thing. But this is long format
Long
writing. This
format
takes
writing.
sometimes a year, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes 2 years, sometimes 6 months. That's a lot of time invested. So if
Yeah.
that much time is invested, then your emotions and your, I mean, the issue which you're writing about, or I
Yeah.
mean, I mean, you better be completely at least honest with your characters and have
Yeah.
a authentic storyline.
Yeah. I was
But
just,
I'd
yeah,
love
like,
to talk about my, and I was hoping you'll ask me about the cover of the book.
I'm getting to that because I was going through all your past, but I've not read, in all honesty, I've not read all your past works, but I was very interested in the themes of the cover, especially Item Girl,
Right.
Hunger Gods, and Contamination.
Hungry Gods. Right.
Hungry God, sorry, and Contamination, my bad. Um,
Huh.
and the just this mood that it's conveyed just from the cover, right? And I wanted to
Huh.
talk about, as an author, how involved were you in this process? Because it really seems like the story is captured, and I don't like, not a lot of covers are aesthetic,
Hmm.
but not a lot of covers can capture that essence, which I feel like all three of these do so well. Because immediately the moment I see each of these books, for that matter, even
Hmm.
Garbage Beat, but these,
Hmm.
because all the themes, that brooding sense of is so visible. So
True.
kudos to the designers, and how I want to talk about the association that you have as a writer of the story with the cover. And I also want to talk about your Hindi books, but we'll come to that. So first, the covers.
Yeah, sure. So, since you said Hindi books, see, this is these are two of my Hindi books which are there, which just came out recently. I don't know whether you can see them. So one is called what is this? News Girl. This is called News Girl,
Yes.
and this
Yes.
one is called Caddy number 0486.
Yes.
So I love these covers. Then apart from that, my first book cover was Garbage Beat,
Yes.
which
I love it.
was Harper Collins. Then I had Item Girl and Hungry Gods.
Yes.
Yeah.
These.
So
Yep.
I love these covers. But I will talk right now about Contamination, this cover, and which I
Yeah.
totally love. I think this cover conveys a sense of menace. The dark form, if you can see here, the dark form here is more real and he's staring directly at you. And the human form is in the mirror. I don't know whether you can see. Human form
Yeah.
is in the mirror
Yeah.
on this side.
Yeah.
And she's looking away from you.
Yes.
So, who's to say what's real?
Correct.
There are two forms here, right? The form
Yeah.
in the mirror or the one staring at you.
Yeah.
So it's a very goosebumpy image for me.
Very much.
It conveys a multiplicity of existence, a multiplicity of form,
Yep.
right? And
Yeah.
the real form is much more darker, and there is the other one which is in the mirror,
Yeah.
who's
Yeah.
looking the other way, and she's more human. So basic theme, I think this cover conveys very well. Is the good versus evil.
Yeah.
Even though the evil is not invested in her, this both these forms are of Amba only, of basically multiplicity of form, concept of
Yeah.
justice. I think also the way the human form is moving away from you. She's not looking at you. It's also a willful move away from the human undercurrent. If
Yeah.
so I kind of read it like that. Maybe I wanted to read it like that. So there is the way she moves away from the reader, like from the spectator. It's like it's a willful move away. And so
Yeah.
that undercurrent is there. So I did not put a demon creature, a winged
Correct.
horn-tailed
Yeah.
devil,
Yeah.
phantasm, waiting to devour you. ऐसा नहीं है इस book में. कोई devil नहीं है. Someone drooling blood. I did not do that for this because I don't think really. I think it would have been lost. Then it would have been kind of only about about the
supernatural.
supernatural creatures,
Yeah.
and this book is not about that. I could have put the soldiers there, but then this book is also not about that only.
Correct.
So since this book is about both the things, I wanted to talk about her emotion. You know what, she's the multiplicity of her existence. So also the fact that, I don't know whether you noticed that this book also has a map inside. It's a fictional map.
Yes. Yes. This is
And I
yeah.
drew this map. Yes, and I drew this map. Of course, I could have hired a cartologist for this, but they are very expensive. So I drew it myself. Thankfully, the publisher agreed to put it in. I think a map like this, really helps the reader,
Navigate.
kind of place the story. Like, kahan pe plot ho raha hai, kya kidhar ho raha hai. Like, there is a jail here, there is a forest here, there is a village here, the witch stays here. So I think when you have something very concrete in front of you, especially when you have a fantasy story, then it kind of helps. I think maps then play a huge influence of how readers imagine the narrative. So it's a great way in helping readers to orient themselves in a fantasy world. A map helps in that. So when you're because your plots are basically playing homage to fictional places, right? They are all fictional places. इसमें कोई जगह exist नहीं करती है. There's a Jotsama jungle. There is a something called Red Hounds area. There is a Northern Heights. There is a Bekal jail. अब ये सब इसमें तो मतलब real life में तो है नहीं. So if you have a map, it helps. And I think map of Hori, and the place is Hori, the village is Hori, and is my way of paying homage to what I think is the mother of all fantasy maps. In Tolkien's Middle Earth map, in Lord of the Rings, if you've seen that map, I mean, it practically invents all the fantasy map cliches. And this is my little way of paying homage to that map. And that's the first time I actually was really, I was struck by how powerfully a map can help the reader. Because I remember when I was reading that book, I kept turning to the map. Acha, ye wala idhar ho raha hai plot. Okay, this is playing out here. So I was like, I have to have a book where there has to be a map in it. And in probably my next book also, I'm going to place a map. So this, I think, gives a sense of perspective and adds to the reading experience.
I also think maps in general, right? Like, just generally help because I need, even if I'm talking about a story set in real life Italy, right? I like the idea of having a map, knowing that okay, this is how they're moving, these are the cities. So in a fantasy world, A, it becomes that much more important. B, I love how you use as a writer
easier to comprehend.
navigate. Yeah. And I just want to ask, did you design that cover or did it come to you and then you kind of worked with it? How was the designing process?
No, I did not. I did not design this cover. I only drew this map. I drew my scrap. This is the one I drew. So, but I did not draw. This is not my.
This is not here. No, I was just kind of trying to say.
No, these covers, all these covers are from the publisher. No.
From the publisher, but they really capture it so well. I feel like,
absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. And I just want to, on a personal note, I love the Lord of the Rings map. I once painted it for a friend of mine. So when you say mother of maps, that's just like sometimes just see the map and like just imagine the story playing out.
I mean, exactly.
And so yeah, this is I have so many other questions about like publishing also because I've seen you've done different publishers for each book. So I want to touch on that a little bit, the publishing journey. How two questions related to that. One is, how does it get easier to find publishers as you have more books and more credibility maybe to your name, and what is the decision behind maybe choosing different publishers for each book? Is it genre based? Is it because the story kind of lends itself to a certain publishing house and their portfolio? So how do you go about that decision?
I think it's more to do with the people you're comfortable working with. I think by God's grace, I've never had really much of a problem or really had to deal or navigate a way to publish my book. That never happened with me. Because even with my first books, probably because I belong, in any case, I'm a journalist and I was writing about the world of journalists and everything. So this came quite easily to me. I mean, I literally had to several publishers who were one. This was my debut book when I wrote it, Garbage Beat. So the journey had begun from this. I think the best way to go about it is to have, when someone had suggested to me at that time, and I got a very good suggestion to always have a literary agent who, um, kind of handholds you and takes you through the whole process, especially when you have another job also and a day
Yeah.
job, and because a lot of time is invested in reaching out to people and things, and you have to answer tons of mails, and you have to. So having a literary agent always helps. But apart from that, when you talk about the publisher, I think I care more about the kind of people I want to work with. That really matters to me. So it may be a group of people who who I'm more comfortable in
Correct.
terms of who great editors, but they may be a smaller publishing house rather than a bigger publishing house where your book will be lost in
Correct.
a clutter. I mean, it will be lost in the clutter because there are too many
Correct.
coming out. And then, you know what, also when you have a smaller publishing house, even though Rupa Publication is one of the big ones, and Om Publication, they have the very book books coming out, and Harper Collins, they're all big publishing
Big
houses.
publishers.
It's just that when you have also a relationship, an equation, a good equation with your editor and the people, you are more comfortable with the people you're
Yeah.
working with, then you can kind of navigate. For instance, you can have your own map in your book. That's easy. You can suggest it. You can get away with, a lot of things. You can talk your way out of. So what I'm saying is, for me, what matters is that the people I work with and the group of people are as much invested in my story. They are seeing where it comes from. They are seeing where it comes from, which zone
So,
or which area
yeah.
it needs to be placed.
Yeah.
So that's what really matters to me.
I love that. I love that. And I've loved how much we've covered in terms of talking about contamination and talking about writing as a craft. And there's so many things I'm already like making like little notes for myself as well. I want to just take a moment, to kind of wrap our conversation to talk about Richa the Reader, right? So kind of, I know Lord, you mentioned Lord of the Rings in the map, so we know that's some of
Yeah.
the one of your favorites possibly. But in terms of the kinds of books and stories that have influenced you along the journey, not necessarily for one or two books, but from
Sure,
maybe
sure.
your earlier reading years. So if you can talk a little bit about your reading journey as well. We'd love to love to
Huh.
hear that as we come to the close of our conversation today.
So as a kid, when I was a child, I remember we used to have a lot of unsupervised reading. Supervised reading, so thai, I'll come to that. But unsupervised readings, I think, is the best kind of reading because no one is telling you what to read. You choose yourself. So in the unsupervised zones, I have read a lot of taboo books from Mills and Boons and Barbara Cartland to D.H. Lawrence and every kind of book. In fact, D.H. Lawrence, I remember I got it as I think it was one of the one of my best essays or something in school. I got it as a award also. But my point is, so there was a lot of taboo reading I indulged in as a kid. And apart from that, when I talk about supervised readings, I was like, as a kid, I mean, we read all kinds of books. I mean, there was R.K. Narayan, Malguri Days. I remember Ruskin Bond, his stories, Tigers for Dinner, and Rusty, and Man with No Face. Remember that story? There was something else. I used to read Enid Blyton, Nancy Drew, Agatha Christie. There was Hercule Poirot. There was Salman Rushdie's Haroon and the Sea of Stories. There was Amar Chitrakatha, Ramayana, Mahabharata tales. Panchatantra, tales from Upanishad, Hitopdesham, I was a story edit, Shakespeare. Okay, we had a lovely reading society club in my school. It was a Delhi school and Frank Anthony, and we had a lovely, and there, read Rebecca, Wuthering Heights, Charles Dickens, Little Women, Pride and Prejudice, Heidi, everything. Well, I was crazy about these characters, man. Charles Dickens, Tale of Two Cities. That was the first book which actually I remember. Tale of Two Cities moved me to tears, especially the last bit where he sacrifices his life. I mean, that was the first book when I realized, oh my God. And there was one book I have to mention, which, apart from Tale of Two Cities, which I think is a kind of book which, if I could have written, oh my God, I would have given everything to write that kind of a book. And there's one more book, which is The Happy Prince and The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. These books are the kind of books which totally moved me, I think, to some emotions. Or if I can talk about my journey as a reader, the emotions I felt for the first time, completely invested, in a book. It was The Happy Prince, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and The Tale of Two Cities. Recently, not really recently, but I can say in maybe the last decade, some of the books which have stayed with me. I liked The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time by Mark Haddon. I liked Hilary Mantel's books, Wolf Hall, Bring Up the Bodies. I liked The Finkler Question by Howard Jacobson. I like George Saunders' Lincoln in the Bardo. Um, so yeah, I mean, James Macpherson ka middle. I'm in the middle of Battle Cry of Freedom. These are a bit books which are a little heavier and they take a lot of time. And I'm still in the middle of it. I'm still struggling because I have made up my mind I have to finish it. So yeah, I mean, these are the kind of books I've kind of grown up on, and I'm still kind of very excited about.
Is your reading now influenced by the subject you're writing about?
You know what? No. Because if I do that, I'm going to just sort of take from the character. What I'm saying is that I may try to, it may get a bit too confusing for me. I will not do that. So the subject which I'm generally writing about is never the stuff which I'm reading on. Like, for instance, if I'm writing, my next book is on gangsters and guerrillas. It's called A History of Violence. But the book I'm reading is totally not that. It's completely different from violence, because you have to have that. You have to step away from your content. You have to step away from your content. It gives you a major relief, and it kind of also makes you can just step away from your thing and you can just look at it from the outside, because you have to also look at it. Sometimes you become too invested in it, and then I don't know whether that really works for you from the reader's point of view.
Yeah.
So no, I never mix the two genres. Never.
That's, I think, a very smart decision, and I like this idea of like creating the balance in the general content universe, right, between what you're reading and what you're writing. I think the net neutral is a great approach. Just in the interest of time, I think I want to pause our conversation for today here. Thank you so much for speaking to us and for delving so much into the different aspects of contamination. I'm sure readers who are reading, are going to like really value the fact that there are these different lenses with which they can now read. Sometimes I think it can be missed if there's not a deeper discussion of it. And so thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to more stories from your end, because I'm just enjoying the diversity with which you've come out, all the stories that have such diverse, interesting, extreme emotion themes. And for me, extreme emotion is a very something I enjoy investing in myself. So thank you, Richa, and all the very best with
Thank you, Prakriti.
And
thank you. And since you mentioned, since you mentioned about diversity, I'm writing about a history of violence, and the book which I'm reading is My Misspent Youth. So it kind of gives me that kind of balance which I need in my life too.
Yeah, I think.
But thank you. It was lovely talking to you, Prakriti.
Lovely, lovely speaking with you. We'll be in touch.
Yes,
thank you so much. Bye.